It came to us in boxes nearly 2 years ago, but by the end of the day, Jeremy and LT will have our F100 begging for paint. Today on Truck Tech, it's the reassembly of a classic with custom fab you can use on your own projects.
Today, we're going to make some progress on our 55 Ford F100 that's been kicking around the shop for quite a while. But unfortunately, like some of your projects at home, this thing's been pushed to the side.
It's been worked on here and there, but today will be the first time this truck will be completely assembled since it's been here in the shop.
And since we're tired of seeing this thing sit around the shop, we're going to see if we can't get it mocked up, ready for paint.
Well, let's just move a couple wires and let's start by getting the cab mounted to the frame.
The post-World War II F-Series made its debut in 1948 and quickly became America's workhorse, and decades later became the best-selling vehicle of all time. It was a favorite among farmers, contractors, and do-it-yourselfers.
And today, it's prime canvas for rebuilds. They all gather here at the F100 SUPERNATIONALS to swap stories and show off their labors of love to fellow enthusiasts.
Ours was rescued from one of those enthusiasts, who, for one reason or another, lost interest in bringing his 55 second gen back from the dead. It's been here in our shop for quite a while, having been picked up as an abandoned project, which isn't uncommon.
For every finished truck you see on the road, there are probably 5 or 10 unfinished, sitting in someone's barn or garage.
1, 2, 3, go.
In our case, it will be a great way to showcase all of the aftermarket goodies available for the F100 platform. Considerable effort went into chopping the top and assembling a variety of parts that were relatively straight and rust-free.
Go up about 6 inches or so. And just as every house has to be built upon a strong foundation, our Ford was no different. We ditched the stock frame in favor of a JW rod garage frame with a Mustang 2 front suspension and a rear 4-link. Motivation is thanks to this Ford Performance Twin Turbo 3.5 V6, which now sits in front of a Tremec 5-speed manual transmission.
So despite the name Project Basket Case, our overall theme is for a clean, show-stopping truck that's also reliable as a daily driver, that can also clean up on the autocross course when called upon.
We want it to stand out from the crowd, and with parts we hand-picked, it should do just that.
But until we get this thing closer to wearing some new paint, it's just another piece of unfinished business.
All right, 1, 2, 3.
Because the bodywork stage is so time-consuming,
Go back a little bit.
we called in some reinforcements. Today we have Larry Harville and Brett Stevens from STIX Rod Shop. They're here to help us catch up. By the end of the day, we hope to have the truck assembled and in primer.
Keep the spacers in place. The first step is to mock up the entire truck.
Now, we're having a little bit of a clearance issue with our upper coilover mount hitting the bottom of this wood. So we made 8 of these temporary spacers that we'll go back and make billet or something like that, just to raise the bed up where we need it.
We're going to completely assemble the cab, bed, fenders, grille, and hood. There are several reasons we need to do this. We need to make sure all the gaps are set so we don't have any serious metal surgery to do after primer.
Secondly, we need to take inventory of all the parts and make sure nothing is missing. And we need to make clearance for our upper control arm here with our JW Rod Garage frame and our stock style inner fenders. We just need to make a little cut. Be sure we have enough clearance for suspension travel.
Is the other one in?
Yeah, let's see if we can get it in there.
If the bolt doesn't go in, get a bigger impact. That's what you need to do.
Give it a little bunk.
We're making pretty good progress getting the body mocked up on the truck. We've got the fenders on, and the next step would have been to mount the hood, but we've got a slight problem. There's just no holes to mount the hinges to. We're guessing somewhere along the way someone decided to run a one-piece tilt front end, so they just welded the holes shut and got rid of them. Well, we're not going to be doing that. We want to run a conventional style hood, so we've got to relocate those holes, drill them out so we can mount the hinges. And speaking of hinges, we're going to be using these Eddy Motorsports billet aluminum pieces, and they're pretty trick. They've got roller bearings for pivots, and they're going to make mocking up the hood 100 times easier than those old stock hinges. Luckily for us, we can see the marks on the back side of this flange where the hood hinge mounting holes used to be. I'm going to drill the holes from the back side and mount the hinge to the cab, being sure to center the bolts in the adjustment slots. Then I can mark exactly where the rear two hinge mounts need to be and drill them out for the 5/16 bolt. After Jeremy does the same thing on the other side, we can test fit the hood.
This thing on.
Since our original was rotted out, we went to LMC Truck and picked up an OE style hood.
Okay, Brett, come down just a little bit. Yep, perfect.
Now, fitment probably isn't going to happen right off the first try. It does take a little time and practice to get your gaps just right and get the hood exactly where you want it. Make a really good gap out of that.
Next, it's onto the prep booth for a bodywork mega thrashing.
We're back on Truck Tech lining up the body panels of our 55 Ford Resto mod. All in all, it took about a half hour to get the hood gaps right where we wanted them.
The bedside fenders create a different problem. Back in the day, these gaps were filled with fender welt, which collected moisture and caused rust. Guest bodyman Larry Harville will close these gaps by moving some metal.
Once we get it in the prep booth, we're going to try to hammer and dolly this out. Worst case, we'll have to cut it right in here and do a little welding.
With the reassembly complete and our panels lined up, we can move over to the prep booth and begin body work.
The fenders and hood come shipped directly from LMC in this E-coat, and for most of you guys at home, it's ready to scuff and shoot. But when you're building a full-on custom truck like we are, we're gonna go ahead and strip this stuff off and rough up our bare metal enough to get some good adhesion. We're using angle grinders and orbital mud busters, both with 36 grit. Again, just to prep the metal to allow good adhesion for our filler material. Since these bedside panels are brand new, they also need to be roughed up for the epoxy primer to stick once we get it in the booth. 180 grit on a DA does the trick. And our filler of choice is Evercoat Rage Gold. I like it because it's durable, shrinkage is minimal, and it sands very easily. For every golf ball size of filler, you need a pea size of hardener. And the way I like to mix it is not to stir it in, I pallet it in. This helps prevent air bubbles. When applying filler, we're trying to pull a smooth, tight, even coat over the surface. Most of this will be sanded off, so we're not gonna lay it on too heavy, just a skim coat.
We couldn't get this truck into primer this week without the help of Larry Harville and Brett Stevens. Larry owns STIX Rod Shop in Savannah, Tennessee, where they specialize in restoration, custom paint, and complete fabrication of high-end rods, like this unbelievable 55 Pontiac Safari in DuPont Wedgwood Green.
I worked with Larry for 2 years. These guys work fast and efficiently. Here, Larry will show us how to stretch this fender gap without filler.
Well, first thing we had to do is make a cut, and that cut allows us to create a gap, and then we go back and we tack it all back together, and we do our grinding. The reason we do this on an edge like that, it's not a good thing to use any type of filler that might later crack through moving or chip off. What we try to do is close up all the gaps the best we can with the steel itself. When we came in and seen what we were going to be working on, we were excited. We like doing Resto mods. We really enjoy them, do a lot of them at our shop. When I seen the quality of what Jeremy has done, I was impressed. And we've enjoyed doing what we've done. We want to make it nice since we're here and working on it.
Somehow I talked Mr. Engineer LT into slinging some filler. I think he's a little more comfortable with a timing light in his hand.
If you're looking to get into body work, I have one suggestion. stay away from it. Run as far as you can, unless you really like punishing yourself, which I don't. Jeremy, do I gotta let this tack up a little bit longer?
Yeah, give it just a little bit longer. Usually you can feel the tackiness of it for when it's ready, but use a little fingernail test. If it'll dig in pretty easy, let it go a little longer.
You know, the one thing I can relate to is the crosshatch pattern, just like what you want to achieve when you're honing a cylinder.
Next, what's blown apart goes back together again.
With the major pieces bodyworked, Larry and Brett will disassemble the bed and get the sides and gate ready for primer by first degreasing the entire surface, removing any oil and dirt. Then, scuff it with 180 grit before the pieces get a few coats of primer.
There's a few different variables when it comes to primer, so do a little research and definitely read the back of your can so you know what you have. Because some primers aren't direct to metal, like what we're going to use here. This is a high build polyester primer, and it requires an epoxy. So we'll lay down a coat of this stuff first, give us the adhesion we need. With the bed sides, rear fenders, and hood in the booth and prepped, we can mix up some epoxy primer. This is PPG's DP50 that mixes 2-to-1 with an activator. All it takes is one wet coat to get everything covered, and it will give us remarkable adhesion. After about a 20-minute flash time, we can mix up our Evercoat Slick Sand Polyester Surfacer. It mixes one activator tube per quart. I like to lay down 3 medium to wet coats of this primer. Each coat gives us anywhere from 2 to 4 mils of thickness, spraying with a 2.0 tip at about 35 psi. So after those few coats, you have plenty of material on the panel to block them laser straight. Now we went ahead and rolled the truck back into the shop to give us room in the prep booth. We've got about half of the parts primed, and we're going to go ahead and get the rest in there and see if we can finish up. But right now we're going to lay some guide coat down on these panels and start dry blocking.
There's 2 different types of guide coat. You either have your wet guide coat, which is in an aerosol can, or you have your dry guide coat, which is in like a powder form. It's all preference on how you want to do it. My preference is the aerosol can. It all works the same. You block it down until you see your filler or your metal. If you still have your low place, you have to come back and smear it with a little putty again.
The grill from our 55 F100 came from the factory in several different pieces with a bunch of chrome trim attached to it. Now that really doesn't match the look that we're going for. We want something that's nice and smooth and low key. There's not going to be a bit of chrome on this entire truck. What that means for us is we've got to fill each and every one of the holes that the chrome trim attached to. We're also going to weld shut all these ugly gaps. They're just not going to work for us. We'll then get it off to bodywork and into primer. In order to fill the trim holes in this grill, I'm just going to use a MIG welder set on a really low heat setting and just weld the holes shut. When I'm starting to fill a hole, I start at the edge and I make really small beads. Now the reason for this is because it's so easy to melt through. And then when you burn through an edge, you just are chasing it farther and farther and farther back. So again, I start with very little beads at a time. Now once I've established a first bead on the edge of the hole, I can start building up a little bit more heat and weld a little bit longer. This way you can almost melt the filler together and make a smoother finished product. Now comes the fun part. We've got to shape those welds that we just laid down to hold this whole piece together. And just like any dentist has a whole tray full of different tools, a good body man will have the same things. I've got an angle grinder here with a really thin cutoff disc that'll help me get into those really fine areas. I've got a couple different die grinders with different shaped bits that'll help me make a little bit of a radius. And lastly, I've got a pair of air-powered grinders with 36 grit paper on them to make everything nice and smooth. And remember, the point is to make everything as good as you possibly can, so all you need is a skim coat of filler just to take care of the little imperfections.
Now with everything in primer, we can start reassembly and recheck all of our fitment.
A project like this on a show like Truck Tech, I think it's going to get people to understand it don't take a lifetime to learn to do this, but it should be a lifetime goal to be able to do this.
So in what, 4 days, we body worked the bed, all the fenders, the hood. We're able to get them in primer.
It's a big job.
And mocked it up before we got going. It's quite an accomplishment to do in 4 days.
What do you think there? I like it. Ready to go home, go to sleep, see my little girl.
Still ahead, how to flush mount custom taillights when Truck Tech continues.
Now this is a roll pan we picked up for our 55 F100 from LMC Truck. We're going to go ahead and weld this thing in, but before we do that, we've got these flush mount LEDs we want to add that's been laying around the shop for a while. We feel like it'll give it a good custom touch. First, we'll start off by finding the center of our taillight lens itself. After that, we'll find the center of the roll pan between the license plate box and the end of the roll pan. Then we know we've got the two centered. We'll find a nice location we like from the top and measure down. Once we do that, we'll take our template and trace out the line. We will lay out a couple of tape lines so we know we get good, accurate cuts. Then we'll test fit our lens to make sure we have a good, tight fit. Now these channels come in one length and they're a little bit too long for what we need. So we're going to head over to the bandsaw and cut them down a little bit. We need to drill a couple of holes in our channel for our two bolts. And with a good fit, we're ready to tack our bolts in. Once we know we've got it all where we want it, we'll pull the channel back off and burn the bolts in for good. Now we can put it all together. Now these taillights are starting to look really good with just a little bit of work. Now there are a lot of different options we could have went with taillights, but we thought this gave us the cleanest look. And we opted for these clear lenses because when we paint the truck, we're going to use a transparent paint that kind of hides them completely. But when the taillights or brake lights come on, they'll be just as bright as anything else on the road. It's starting to look really good. That'll be awesome.
Now that I've got the grill welded up and ground pretty smooth, I'm going to apply a quick layer of this direct metal aluminum reinforced filler to the seams that I've welded just to take care of any last pinholes that might be remaining. I'm not going to try to build up any amount of thickness here. Again, this is just a small, thin coat.
Just like in your garage, we've got parts in this shop that need to be cleaned too. And these Scott heavy-duty shop towels, they hold together longer and they absorb more than your average towel. In fact, they are 3 times stronger when wet than their originals. We soaked a Scott heavy-duty shop towel and a generic brand shop towel with brake cleaner. How well do they both support this 10-pound wheel hub? Well, you be the judge. Plus, you can rinse out the Scott heavy-duty and reuse it again. They're available at most automotive retailers.
Ever wish you had more than just a 1 or 5 gallon can of gas around the shop at the same time? Well, Summit Racing has the solution to that problem with the Fuel Chief line of steel and poly gas caddies. Their polyethylene fuel cart is DOT approved, gravity fed, and designed for storing and transferring fuel to boats, generators, four-wheelers, and of course, lawn equipment. This 25-gallon steel unit is UL listed and OSHA approved, and is perfect for small auto repair shops making fuel transfer safe and easy with this top-mounted pump. Both are available at summitracing.com.
I've got the roll pan all welded in and it's looking really good, along with the taillights, but I think we'll change these amber LEDs out to some red ones. Now we've accomplished a lot in a short amount of time by getting this truck all mocked up and in a primer.
I'd like to give a special thanks to Larry and Brett from STIX Rod Shop. Their help and skill was invaluable getting the truck to where it is today. We've also installed the grill on the truck, and I think we could just barely see the finishing line, even though it's kind of off in the distance.
Yeah, and the next time you guys see this truck, we'll get the turbos all mocked up along with hopefully getting it into paint. Make a body guy to you yet.
I just don't think that's possible.
Oh man, you're doing really good.
Well, thanks, I guess.
It's gonna be a good looking truck.
It will.